Hi, my name is Brian Lee, and I'm a psychiatry resident at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Clozapine is a very interesting and important medication for several reasons. For one thing, it's the most effective antipsychotic medication we have, even though it's the oldest of the second generation or atypical agents. Another reason is that it's the only antipsychotic with an FDA indication for treatment-resistant schizophrenia, which could represent up to a third of all patients with schizophrenia. And finally, it's also the only antipsychotic with an FDA indication for reducing suicidal behavior in schizophrenia. There have been other studies in the past, like the InterSePT trial, that showed that clozapine can reduce suicide-related outcomes like suicidal ideation or attempts. However, most clinical trials don't have enough power to show whether this impacts the actual number of suicide deaths. And we thought this was an important distinction to make because for most people who die by suicide, they don't have a known history of suicidal ideation or attempts. This led us to look at a large epidemiological data set in the form of statewide autopsy records. We looked at autopsy records from the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Maryland. They actually measured the blood levels of antipsychotics like clozapine and olanzapine on a routine basis. So this allowed us to compare people who had clozapine detected in their blood to people with olanzapine. It also had the added advantage that we were looking at serum measurements of these medications, as opposed to prescription records or self-reports of adherence. So as a result, we found that people on clozapine were about half as likely to have died by suicide compared to people on olanzapine. Why clozapine has this protective effect on suicidality, I think, is very interesting, and there are several ideas out there. One idea was that it was related to its superior efficacy in controlling or reducing the psychotic symptoms of schizophrenia, but there have been studies that showed that the effect on suicidality is independent of the antipsychotic efficacy. So other ideas have looked at the many different neurotransmitter receptors that clozapine is active at, which can affect antidepressant pathways that could explain the independent effect from the antipsychotic effects. We don't know the specific chemical or biological mechanism of these pathways. We do know that clozapine is very nonspecific in its binding, so it binds not only various dopamine receptors, but various serotonin, histamine, and anticholinergic receptors. And so, the paradigm is that this nonspecific binding profile is responsible for the many different effects of clozapine. However, I think studies are starting to look at what is downstream of these neurotransmitter receptors, such as gene expression changes and its effect on cellular pathways like antioxidant processes, inflammation, and stress pathways. But the answer is we really don't know what exactly is going on.